Hey guys, in this video I'm going to review my Game Boy games, and I've been on a portable kick lately just because the 3DS has been awesome, you know, within the past couple months. I've been playing a ton of portable games, and I definitely just wanted to review my Game Boy games, and in a future video I'll do my Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games, but until then I'm just focusing on Game Boy just to keep the video a little shorter than usual since, if you follow me a lot, you'll see that my videos are a lot longer than they should be, unfortunately. But there will be one exception. There will be one Game Boy Color game in this video, which hopefully will make some sense to you later. And there are also a few black cartridge games, which means they were compatible on Game Boy and Game Boy Color. And I will be including those in this video just because, I mean, technically those are Game Boy games. I mean, they play on the damn system. So anyway, I'll start out by kind of talking about the Game Boy and how I play the games these days. This, of course, is an original Game Boy, and it's tough to play games on these days since the screen is just really blurry and doesn't have a backlight. So I just have this for nostalgic purposes. I don't actually use it, really. In case you're wondering what the best option to play Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on, this is what I use. I use this Game Boy Advance SP model, and that's not the standard Game Boy Advance SP, it's the AGS 101 model, which means it has the backlight, which came out really late into the Game Boy Advance's life, maybe in '05 or '06. Most of the Game Boy Advance SPs are front lit and have a much lower, it produces less light, and this one, games play really well on this. It has, the screen quality is really nice, and everything's just really clear and well lit, so to speak. So we'll do a little test to compare. Sorry about that. The SP's sort of playback with the Game Boy original. Now, obviously, the camera has a light, but the Game Boy is much worse than person. But I have two copies of Tetris, and both of them are running at the same time. Now, obviously, there's no issue looking at the game here. On this, on the other hand, kind of have to zoom in, and again, this camera's a light, so it's even harder to do in person. There's also a even brighter button that makes it even more clear on the SP. And even the lowest brightness setting on this model, the SP, is brighter than the original SP model, so that's really nice. And if I don't feel like playing Game Boy Color games on a portable system, I'll use the Game Boy player from the GameCube. But I won't use the Game Boy or the GameCube controller just because the D-pad is really small, and one of the bad aspects of that controller. So I actually got this controller for the GameCube. It's made from Hori, unfortunately Japan only, but I got it off someone from NeoGAF for a good price, so hopefully if you can find this, I'd highly recommend it. It's obviously shaped like a Super Nintendo controller, but it also has little grips on the sides, so it's a little easier to hold. There's also an Indigo version, which I would have preferred, but this is all he had, so I got the black one. Let's get on to the reviews. Now, I'm not usually one of those reviewers who just likes to list off my games just to brag to people, and I usually like to sort of offer some insight on my games, but with one exception here. I have a few games that I got within a lot that I don't actually like. Like, for example, I bought a copy of Mega Man 5, but it also came with a crappy copy of Snoopy, some Snoopy game, which I couldn't care less about, so I do have a few games that I haven't played just because I have no interest in them. They're just random crappy games, so I'll just list them off quickly. Spider-Man 2, I'm sure it's a crappy game, since most licensed games are. Wave Race, I always thought that series was a little overrated, and I'm sure this game isn't much better than the N64 version. WWF Superstars 2, it has Macho Man Randy Savage on the cover, rest in peace, that's about all I can say about that. Super RC Pro-Am, haven't played that with the NES version, can't say anything. Some Bo Jackson baseball game, again, I don't care. Top Rank Tennis, no thanks. The aforementioned Snoopy game, and Terminator 2. So with those games out of the way, let's actually get to the real games here. I'll start out with Super Mario Land. This is a launch game for the Game Boy, and it's out on the 3D eShop right now, Virtual Console. And it's definitely a toned-down Mario game. The levels are a lot weirder, and it's a very easy game to finish, and kind of goes off the wall here, and the fire flower is kind of a ball instead of actual. It kind of bounces around and sort of interesting in that way. It's an okay game. Not something I would, recommend to everyone, but it is a pretty good Mario game. I wouldn't even put it in the same league as the console versions or the recent portable iterations like New Super Mario Brothers and 3D Land. But it is something to look out for. Next up is its sequel, Super Mario Land 2. Kind of builds on the original, but it's a little more conventional. Again, not a great game. I wish I could have more to say about it, but like I said, I vastly prefer the console versions. The next Mario Land game is a little more interesting. It's not even a Mario game, really. It's Super Mario Land 3 Wario Land, which is an awkwardly titled game. But with this game, Wario kind of established his own identity. I don't know if this came before or after Wario's Woods or Wario Blast, but he just seemed like a gimmicky villain, an alternate to Bowser, if you will. But in this game, it kind of establishes his characteristics, like being greedy, and the game offers different mechanics than the Mario games. This game isn't really about like Twitch platforming, arcade action, or some generic term you're used to hearing, but it's more of an exploratory game. Definitely built on that later Wario Land games, but you get different suits, and the sprite is a lot larger in this game compared to the Mario games. I also have the box, which is in pretty good condition. Bought it off some nice guy at NeoGaf. And as you can see, the sprite is pretty large. Good game. I'd say even better than the Mario Land games since they're unique, or since this game is unique. So let's talk about the Mega Man games on the system. Here is Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge. This is basically a remake of the first one, though it has a few bosses from Mega Man 2. And, this was in an era when you didn't have high expectations of portable games. It's not like it is now with the DS, 3DS, PSP and such, where you kind of see these new original exciting games that are on par with the console games. A lot of games back then were just really dumbed down console ports, and this is another one, I'm afraid. The levels are pretty well rendered. It does play a lot like the original, which is kind of nice, but I wouldn't recommend it over the original, personally. With that being said, though, this is Mega Man 3, and I've had this for a really long time, pretty much since it came out. I actually do love this game. It's pretty much a remake of 3. It has bosses from 4 as well. But the levels are really good. The music was really good in 3, but I'd say even better in the Game Boy Mega Man 3. Sorry, it's kind of confusing since they both have the same title. The NES version of this, I mean. But I'd say the Game Boy Mega Man 3 has better music than NES version. So, sorry for being so long-winded, but yeah, I really like this game, and I'd rather play this over the NES version, to be quite frank. If you don't know what Mega Man games are, they're basically like side-scrolling, action games where each level has a boss, and once you beat a boss, you gain his power, which you use to defeat other bosses. Each boss has a weakness, which you exploit using a weapon you got from another boss, so it's a really cool mechanic, and probably my third favorite series behind Mario and Zelda, so yeah. And here's Mega Man 5. Unlike the two games I mentioned, this It's a completely original game with unique bosses and levels, and it's actually quite expensive online, maybe about like $40. Like I said, I got a good deal on it since the guy didn't know how much it was worth, which is ideal. And yeah, it's probably the best Game Boy Mega Man game, especially if you kind of don't want to play a remake, which the other games were, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't have too much to say. Definitely hope this comes on the 3DS eShop, since a lot of people are looking for it. And next up is Mega Man Extreme. See how extreme it is? Doesn't even have an E on it. But this is a remake of Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo, and I'm always fascinated by these sort of downgrades, if you will, from the consoles. I like to see how they pull it off from a technical standpoint, and in the case of Mega Man Extreme, not very well, unfortunately. It looks pretty good graphically, but the game is really slow, really crappy frame rate, and not nearly enough enemies, and there are only like 4 bosses instead of 8. I don't remember how many bosses. There might be like 5, but the levels just aren't as well developed. It's not as smooth, which is something you can say about Mega Man X. It's an extremely smooth game, and this is not. And I also have Mega Man Extreme 2. Unfortunately, I can't comment on it since I haven't played it. I got Extreme and Extreme 2 off Amazon like a few months ago. They sell them new for like $12, and that's why I picked them up. And don't have too much to say. I assume it's similar to the original Extreme, which is to say not very good. So yeah, I hope you like that kind of insight. So anyway, moving on. Here is Donkey Kong. To kind of differentiate itself from the arcade version, fans refer to this version as Donkey Kong 94, and this sort of builds off the arcade version. In fact, when you first boot it up, you play the first few levels of the Donkey Kong arcade game on the Game Boy, on a Game Boy screen. So I guess you're sort of underwhelmed at first. You're like, oh, okay, this is just like a kind of crappy remake of the original. But once you beat those levels, you kind of go to a map screen, which has tons of new levels, which are a lot more complex than the arcade levels, which is really nice. You're sort of going after keys and opening doors, and while trying to avoid Donkey Kong's like barrels and such. And they made a pseudo remake of this Mario vs. Donkey Kong on the Game Boy Advance, which is available on the Ambassador program if you're an ambassador. And this particular Donkey Kong game is on the eShop currently, so I'd recommend downloading it. So yeah, and another Donkey Kong game is Donkey Kong Land. Now, the previous Donkey Kong game was before his transformation, his rareware transformation, which divides fans to this day. I'm on the camp of loving the rare Donkey Kong, just because I love Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3, particularly 2. But in the same way Mega Man was sort of a remake of the NES version, this is a remake of Country, sort of. And the Super Nintendo version was well known for being like a graphical masterpiece at the time. And it is sort of interesting how they adapted this to the Game Boy. It still looks pretty nice, but obviously it's not in color, and the fidelity isn't as clear. It's kind of blurry, but plays really well for what it is, and not something I'd particularly recommend these days, since it's not as good as the SNES versions in my opinion. This is just something to play if you really love rare Donkey Kong, and obviously Rare isn't around to make these Donkey Kong games anymore since they were bastardized by Microsoft. I'm still kind of bitter about that. Maybe on another video I'll expand on that a little. But yeah, I don't have Donkey Kong Land 2 or 3, but hopefully I will one day. And next up is Metroid 2: Return of Samus. Now, in my opinion, this game is in desperate need of a remake in the same way the original was remade on the Game Boy Advance as Metroid Zero Mission. Uh, Basically, this game's problem is that it's a little too linear. There's not the levels or the overworld isn't very big since it's kind of confined by the Game Boy's limitations, and the sprite is ridiculously large, the Samus sprite, because obviously the screen is smaller on the Game Boy, so the sprites have to be a little bigger so you can, and it's in black and white, so you have to, make them a little more iconic and visible to the player. And I don't know, this just doesn't hold up that well. This is on the eShop if you're interested, but I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who, unless you're dying for more Metroids, and it doesn't seem like we're going to get any more 2D Metroids, unfortunately. But I much prefer the Game Boy Advance games and Super Metroid, in my opinion. And next up is Dragon Warrior 1 and 2. Now, obviously, this is before they changed the name back to Dragon Quest, which I believe was due to licensing issues that they had to name a Dragon Warrior for a long time. But yeah, this is a remake of the first two games, which were on the NES, and they don't really release. They remake these games a lot in Japan, but they don't release a lot of the remakes stateside. But so if you really like 1 and 2 and you want to, replay them, then this is the one to get, since the NES ones are kind of archaic, sort of from a user interface perspective, and especially in Japan, where they had password systems, which is just terrible if you think about it, using passwords as an RPG. But yeah, you kind of know what you're getting. Dragon Warrior is pretty much like the quintessential Japanese RPG, for better or for worse. And next up, one of the more famous Game Boy games, Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Now, I also included the Game Boy Color remake, which is compatible with the original Game Boy anyway. Link's Awakening DX. This is a really good Zelda game. Like, make no mistake. Unlike some of the other, sort of console franchises that were made for the Game Boy, this is like a wholly unique, original, and well-developed game. It's kind of a self-contained story where you're kind of in this dream world, and so it's not all that much connected to the other games, though it is sort of connected to the Oracle games, based on my own speculation, but anyway, it has a complete overworld, which is a rarity since the recent Zelda games don't have overworld, which annoys the hell out of me. And it has really, well-designed dungeons, and some unique weapons or unique items like the Rock's Feather, which lets you jump, which is a rarity in Zelda games. It has really punchy dialogue. It's really humorous. For example, if you go to the shop and you're allowed to steal items, but if you go back to the store after you stole an item, the store owner won't be very pleased and he'll zap you to death, which is funny. And for the rest of the game, the characters will call you Thief instead of the name you chose when you started the file. And it's also kind of a weird crossover with Mario. It has Goombas and Shy Guys as the enemies, and it has Chain Chomps and a Yoshi doll, which is kind of funny. But it's a really good Zelda game. In my opinion, not as good as the Oracle games on the Game Boy Color, but it's a great game. DX is on the eShop. The only differences between DX and the original is that DX has obviously redone graphics, sort of. They're colorized, which they're kind of dark, and I don't really like the recolorization. But especially when compared to the Oracle games, which look fantastic on a Game Boy Advance SP. And it has a specific color dungeon to the game, and it's sort of gimmicky because it utilizes color a lot, which you typically find in when a new console comes out. Games have to utilize its unique feature. Like when the Wii came out, for the first year, most of the games kind of tacked on the Wii Remote controls for the hell of it for no reason, and it's no different with this game, unfortunately. But yeah, great games, or great game. Yeah, highly recommend. Let's see. Alright, moving on. We have Castlevania The Adventure, or maybe it's The Castlevania Adventure, it's hard to tell. It's kind of a stupidly titled game, but I wouldn't recommend this really. It's just kind of a dumbed down Castlevania game. There's sort of a reimagined game on WiiWare called Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, which I don't know why they chose to remake or reimagine this game, but yeah, I don't know. Castlevania is sort of a hit or miss series, and I wouldn't really recommend this one, sadly. Next up, we have Final Fantasy Legend, and I compare this to Castlevania The Adventures because I kind of see this as a mediocre iteration of a great console series onto a portable, and I haven't played this a lot just because it hasn't been very compelling to me so far, and I definitely would recommend the console versions over this, unfortunately, so don't have too much to say. Next up is Gargoyle's Quest, and this is a sequel to a NES game, or I don't know which one came first actually, and there's also a great Super Nintendo version called Demon's Crest. It doesn't share the same name, but it's in the same series. Now this is a spin-off of the Ghouls and Ghosts series, or is it Ghosts and Goblins? I know they both exist, but I don't know what the official series is called. But anyway, it's a great little game. It's sort of a exploratory platform game with you play as a gargoyle from the Ghouls and Ghosts series, and I don't have too much to say about it, unfortunately. But it's like I said, it's a great little game, and it's also on the 3DS eShop. And next up is Kid Icarus. What is it called? Let's see, what's the subtitle? Of Myth and Monsters. Sorry about that. Now, as much as people like Kid Icarus, there's only 2 games in the series, which is funny. The NES version and obviously this version, though the 3DS one is coming out in a couple months, which looks awesome, by the way. And this is actually a surprisingly good game. I didn't even like the NES version that much, just because I think it's a little too dated, but this is a really good version of it, and for some reason it plays really well in the Game Boy Color. Like, for example, Pit, the main character, his outfit is white, just like it should be, for whatever reason, and his skin color is accurate if you play it on a Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Color, which is strange. I don't know how that really worked, but it's sort of like a platformy game. It's more vertical though than most platformers, which are obviously left to right. This one you go up and down a lot, and it's quite a difficult game. But the funny thing is, Nintendo's actually taken this out of the canon, the quote-unquote canon. I hate to use that word with with this kind of game, but they don't even acknowledge its existence, which is funny. With that being said, I'm not even sure if they'll release that on the eShop. But I could see it happening, to build up hype for the 3DS game. And here we have Mole Mania. Now, this was actually designed... Oh, I don't know if it was designed, but I know Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, Zelda, and Donkey Kong, worked on this game. It's one of his lesser-known games. It's actually a really nice, underrated game where you sort of use 2 planes, the above-ground and underground aspects of it, and you start above ground and you can see obstacles in front of you, and to kind of like fences and such, but to kind of traverse them, you have to go underground, and you can sort of uproot them and stuff. It's a really cool mechanic, and definitely underrated. I'm sure it will arrive on the eShop one of these days. And next up is Mario's Picross. If you watch my other videos, you'll know that I love this series, and in my opinion, the DS version and Picross 3D are better than this, but Still highly recommend this game. This is also on the 3DS eShop. It's basically a grid-based Sudoku picture game. It's kind of tough to explain the mechanic, but you can just lose hours to this game, and yeah, there isn't too much not much else to say, but I also have the Japan-only Mario's Picross 2, just kind of more levels, sort of a, if you've played a ton of the other ones and you want more puzzles, this is kind of one to get. Hopefully they release this on the 3DS eShop as a import game like they've done to other stuff like Sin and Punishment. But finally, the white elephant in the room. Obviously, this sort of revitalized the Game Boy in a major way. There's a lot to say about these games. Pokemon Red and Blue. Alright. Now, in case you're really young, I mean, obviously you know about Pokemon. It's still pretty popular today, but when it first came out, this series was huge. It was everywhere. Stores couldn't keep these things in stock. The trading card game was huge. The anime, which is terrible in retrospect, was huge. It was just a great marketing push by Nintendo, kind of this three-pronged attack with the card game, the anime, and the game. But it was all anyone ever talked about back then. I was fortunate enough to, be part of that craze. It lasted for about 2 years, where it was just, like the biggest thing ever. And, unlike most, quote-unquote fads or, sort of those things that companies try to exploit kids with, these are actually really great games. These are top quality, some of the best games ever made. I've talked about it a lot in other videos, but I really appreciate the battle mechanics of these games where, you really pay attention to, the Pokemon you face, what Pokemon you get. You really, you pay attention to the moves, what they're called. Like in Final Fantasy, you don't know why you're facing who you're facing. Like, these random monsters that aren't even part of the story. You're not even sure why they're there. And, the moves are just kind of generically named. But, everything about this series is there's a lot to say, and I wish I could say more, but this video is already running kind of long, and could not recommend these games enough, though I will say I prefer the Game Boy Advance remakes, which I'll talk about when I review those Game Boy Advance games, which might be in 3 years, knowing me. And next up is Pokemon Yellow. This is sort of a pseudo remake of Red and Blue. It kind of started off a trend where whenever a new generation of games come out, they release 2 versions, but then later on they release a 3rd version that they kind of clean up all the small glitches and stuff. But yeah, this is really, I'd say this is worth playing just because you're starting Pokemon as Pikachu, unlike in the other games. Plus, you get all 3 of the starter Pokemon, whereas in Red and Blue you have to trade for them. And of course, you face Team Rocket, and it's just more closer to the anime, which is interesting. I also like on the back of the box where it says, requires basic reading skills to fully enjoy the entertaining story. I like how they say it's entertaining, which it isn't, to be honest. And next up is the next generation of Pokemon games, Pokemon Gold and Crystal. I don't have Silver for some reason. But obviously Crystal's a Game Boy Color game, but I included it just because it'd be kind of weird to review Gold now and then Silver later when they're essentially the same game. And, they added a ton of stuff to this generation. This kind of came out, at least in my school, when Pokemon was kind of dying. But this sort of revitalized it a bit. Obviously it wasn't what it used to be at that point, but They added 2 new types of Pokemon, Steel and Dark. They added a day and night cycle, 100 new Pokemon, and obviously one of the features that people still love to this day is that you can play. You can go back to the original region of where Red, Blue, and Yellow took place and play those over again. I sort of explained this when I reviewed Pokemon Heart Gold on my DS collection review, but I always thought this generation was a little bit overrated. I still love these games, but a little overrated just because I thought the Dark and Steel types weren't well developed. There weren't really any moves that were good for those 2 types, and the day and night cycle was kind of dumb. I'm glad that it's not as prevalent as it used to be. And when you go back to the region from Red, Blue, and Yellow, it just kind of takes like 2 hours to beat. So, I prefer Red, Blue, and Yellow. I also prefer Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but these are still great games. And the final game I'll review, Pokemon trading card game. Obviously, I collected the cards before this game came out, but to be honest, the rule set is kind of complicated for kids, so I didn't actually know how to play, and no one I knew how to play either until this game came out, which I think was like in 2001 or something. Maybe 2000, I don't really remember, but this is a really great game. It has a single player mode, kind of structured like the proper Game Boy games where you have to collect 8 badges. I play this game a lot, even to this day, but I wish there were more cards. Kind of limited in sort of the card sets in this game. I wish there would be a sequel or something. I definitely would highly recommend this game. But that's about it for my Game Boy reviews. Hopefully the color one will come out shortly. I don't have that many Game Boy Color games, but I think I have a lot more to say about them. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.